If this reached you now, it wasn't random. You weren't meant to hear this during the noise of the new moon itself. You were meant to hear it after, when the sky looks ordinary again and most people think the moment has passed. But for you, this is when things actually begin. You may have noticed something strange in the days after the new moon. Instead of feeling calm or refreshed, time started moving faster. Days blurred together. Thoughts repeated. Emotions surfaced without warning. Not loud enough to be dramatic. Just persistent enough to be impossible to ignore. This is the phase almost no one talks about. The new moon gets attention because it's visible. Intentions. Rituals. Fresh starts. But the real work doesn't happen under the dark sky. It happens after, when life returns to normal and distractions rush back in. That's when awareness is tested. You may have felt mentally restless. Not anxious, just alert in a quiet way. As if something inside you stayed awake while the world went back to sleep. Conversations felt thinner. Silence felt heavier. Even familiar routines carried a strange sense of distance. This isn't because something is wrong. It's because your system noticed the shift and refused to forget it. After the new moon, energy doesn't disappear. It integrates. And integration is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as loops. You replay old conversations in your mind. Not because you want to, but because something unresolved is surfacing. Memories return without emotion attached, like files reopening on their own. You question decisions you thought were settled. You feel pulled to pause instead of push. Most people drown this phase out. They scroll. They stay busy. They label the discomfort as boredom or moodiness and move on. But you didn't. You noticed the stillness behind the noise. You felt that something was rearranging quietly, not outside but within you. This is the difference. The moon's real work begins when it's no longer visible. When there's no symbol in the sky to remind you. When intuition has to operate without reinforcement. And you felt that absence clearly. You may have felt less interested in explaining yourself. Less drawn to react. More selective with words, energy, and attention. Not because you're withdrawing, but because your awareness sharpened. During this phase, the mind starts sorting. Not logically. Energetically. Thoughts that no longer match your direction begin to feel heavy. Certain emotions feel outdated, like clothes that no longer fit your nervous system. You may feel irritation toward things you once tolerated easily. That irritation isn't anger. It's misalignment becoming noticeable. You're no longer numb enough to ignore it. The quiet after the new moon exposes truth without drama. It doesn't shout. It waits. You may have caught yourself staring into space more often. Not dissociating, observing. As if your awareness stepped half a pace back to watch your own life. That's not detachment. That's perspective forming. This phase separates those who live reactively from those who live consciously. Most people need events to change before they adjust internally. You adjust internally before anything changes at all. That's why this feels uncomfortable. You're ahead of the evidence. The mind wants proof. The soul works on timing. Right now, subtle internal signals matter more than external confirmation. The faint pull. The hesitation before speaking. The sudden clarity that arrives for no obvious reason. These are not random. They are signs that the new moon activated something deeper than intention. It activated awareness. And awareness doesn't fade when the moonlight returns. It grows quieter, sharper, more precise. You're in the phase where distractions fall away on their own. Where silence carries more information than conversation. Where your inner dialogue becomes more honest. Sometimes uncomfortably so. And this is only the beginning. Because once awareness stabilizes, time markers start appearing. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But clearly, if you're paying attention. And one of those markers has already passed. January 20th. You may not have noticed anything obvious that day. That's exactly why it mattered. January 20th. The invisible turning point. Nothing dramatic needed to happen on January 20th for it to matter. No announcement. No emotional peak. No external confirmation that something had shifted. And yet, something did. If you think back to that day or the days surrounding it, you may notice how quiet it felt. Not empty, still. Like the pause between breaths. The moment right before a decision is made without words. This is how real turning points arrive for people like you. Certain dates don't close chapters. They unlock directions. January 20th wasn't an ending. It was a hinge. An energetic marker where inner alignment quietly began influencing outer movement. Not all at once. Not visibly. But decisively. You may have felt slightly different afterward without being able to explain why. Your thoughts didn't become louder, they became clearer. Ideas that once floated aimlessly suddenly felt usable. Not exciting. Practical. This is important. When an awakening moves from emotional to functional, it stops feeling mystical and starts feeling grounded. You don't daydream about change, you prepare for it without realizing you are. After January 20th, your inner voice likely became less dramatic and more directive. Shorter sentences. Quieter nudges. A simple sense of, not that anymore, or, this needs attention. Not urgency. Accuracy. That's how guidance sounds when it's ready to be acted on. For centuries, specific dates have been used not for spectacle, but for orientation. Moments where direction matters more than speed. Where alignment matters more than outcome. January 20th carries that energy. It's a point where awareness stabilizes enough to influence behavior. Before that, insight arrives like waves. After that, it begins to steer. You may have noticed small external reflections. Conversations shifting tone. People responding differently to you. Opportunities appearing without excitement attached, just relevance. You weren't chasing them. They weren't chasing you. They simply crossed your path naturally. This is how timelines shift when force is removed. You may also have felt less tolerant of confusion. Less willing to entertain ambiguity where clarity is possible. Not because you became rigid, but because your system stopped wasting energy. What once felt complicated now feels unnecessary. That's not judgment. That's efficiency. January 20th marked the moment where your awareness stopped observing from the background and stepped closer to the controls. Quietly. Without asking permission. You didn't suddenly become someone else. You became more available to yourself. This is often mistaken for withdrawal. Others may have felt you pull back slightly. But what actually happened is that you stopped leaking attention. Your energy became more contained. More deliberate. That containment is power, but not the loud kind. It's the kind that notices timing. That waits. That doesn't need to convince. After this date, your thoughts likely began influencing your actions in subtle ways. You choose differently without debating it. You pause before responding. You let certain things pass without explanation. And strangely, life doesn't punish you for this. It adjusts. That's how you know the shift is real. Because when awareness aligns with timing, resistance fades. January 20th didn't demand that you change everything. It simply repositioned you so the next changes could happen without struggle. And once this repositioning occurs, signals begin to surface. Emotionally, mentally, physically. Not as warnings. As communication. You may already be feeling them. Repetitions. Waves. Sensations that don't need interpretation to be valid. That's what comes next. Because before life changes visibly, the system runs diagnostics. And your system has been very active. Repeating thoughts, sudden emotions, and physical signals. You may have noticed it already. A thought that returns no matter how many times you set it aside. An emotion that rises without a clear trigger. A sensation in your body that doesn't feel like illness. Just information. This isn't regression. It's processing. When awareness stabilizes after a turning point like January 20th, the system begins clearing what can't move forward with you. And it does this in layers, not logically but rhythmically. That's why the mind repeats. Repetition isn't obsession here. It's attention being directed towards something unresolved, unfinished, or outdated. Not to drag you backward, but to loosen what's been holding energy in place. You may find yourself replaying moments that no longer hurt, yet still demand acknowledgement. Old decisions. Conversations that ended quietly. Paths you didn't take, not with regret, but curiosity. This phase often feels emotionally neutral and intense at the same time. You're not overwhelmed, yet you're aware of more. That's a sign of integration. Emotions during this phase don't arrive with stories attached. They arrive raw, unlabeled. A wave of sadness that fades as quickly as it came. A sudden warmth in the chest. A tightness that releases without explanation. These are not moods. They're releases. Your nervous system is discharging stored responses that no longer match your present awareness. You're not reacting to current life, you're completing past cycles internally. That's why explanation feels unnecessary. The body often speaks first. Tingling in the hands or spine. Sudden fatigue followed by clarity. A need to sleep more, then less. Moments where your breath deepens on its own. These sensations aren't problems to solve. They're signals of recalibration. The body updates before the story does. Most people ignore these signs until they become discomfort. You notice them while they're still subtle. That's why they pass more gently. You may also experience brief bursts of insight. Not revelations, confirmations. Simple truths that land quietly and feel final. You realize you're done with certain patterns without making a declaration. You stop explaining yourself to people who no longer need access. You recognize what drains you without analyzing why. This phase doesn't ask you to act dramatically. It asks you to listen without interference. The mind wants to categorize. The body wants to complete. If you let it, this process happens efficiently. That's why forcing meaning slows things down. You don't need to decode every feeling. You don't need to justify every reaction. Awareness is enough. You may also notice that your tolerance for emotional noise has dropped. Crowded spaces feel heavier. Small talk feels louder. Certain media loses its grip. This isn't sensitivity increasing, it's filtration improving. Your system is choosing coherence over stimulation. And once this filtration sharpens, something interesting happens. Old patterns return. Not to trap you, but to test whether they still fit. They come back lightly, briefly, almost politely. People, situations, habits that once defined you may reappear in subtle ways. Not as crises, as invitations to respond differently. That's where the real change shows itself. Because repetition isn't always a loop. Sometimes it's a final pass. And how you meet it now determines whether it dissolves or continues. That's where we're heading next. Karmic endings and the return of old patterns. When old patterns return now, they don't arrive with the same weight they once carried. They show up lightly, briefly, almost as if they're checking whether you still recognize them. This is how completion works. You may notice familiar situations resurfacing without emotional charge. A person reaches out. A habit tempts you. A thought pattern tries to resume its old role. But something is different. There's no pull. No urgency. No need to react the way you once did. That absence is the signal. Karmic endings rarely announce themselves as endings. They appear as repetitions that no longer hook you. Moments that once would have triggered confusion, guilt, or overthinking now pass through with clarity. This is not avoidance. It's resolution. You're not being tested to see if you'll endure the same pain again. You're being shown how much space you've already cleared. Many people misunderstand this phase. They see old patterns return and assume they've failed. They think growth should mean never seeing the past again. But true integration allows the past to appear without power. When something returns and you no longer need to explain, defend, or fix it, that's completion. You may notice confusion briefly surface. Not because things are unclear, but because your mind expects intensity where there is none. It searches for the old emotional script and doesn't find it. That moment of confusion is actually clarity forming. You're witnessing the gap between who you were and who you are now. Letting go in this phase doesn't require effort. It happens naturally when you stop feeding what no longer fits. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need dramatic decisions. You don't need to label endings. Awareness dissolves attachment on its own. You may find yourself choosing silence instead of explanation, distance instead of reaction, rest instead of repetition. This isn't withdrawal. It's discernment. Old habits lose momentum when they're no longer defended. Old dynamics fade when they're no longer personalized. Old identities dissolve when they're no longer rehearsed internally. This is why things feel quieter now. The absence of internal noise can feel unfamiliar at first. You may catch yourself waiting for the next emotional wave, and noticing it doesn't come. That calm isn't emptiness. It's space. And space is where new alignment begins. The most important part of this phase is how gently it unfolds. Nothing is being ripped away. Nothing is being forced. Life is simply responding to your updated awareness. And as karmic loops complete, attention becomes available for something else. Not the dramatic kind. The subtle, daily kind. Because once old patterns lose their grip, your smallest decisions start carrying unusual weight. Not because they're risky, but because they're accurate. That's where reality begins to shift quietly. And that's what comes next. Personal choices that quietly reshape reality. Once old patterns loosen their hold, something subtle but powerful takes their place. Not the loud, life-altering decisions people announce. The quiet ones you make without witnesses. The moment you pause before responding. The decision to be honest instead of agreeable. The choice to rest instead of push. During this phase, small choices carry unusual weight. Not because the universe is watching, but because you are. Your awareness is now present enough to register alignment in real time. You feel immediately when something fits, and you feel it just as clearly when something doesn't. This is new. Before, decisions may have been driven by habit, obligation, or momentum. Now they're guided by coherence. By what settles the nervous system rather than excites it. You may notice that comfort and clarity no longer feel the same. Comfort soothes temporarily. Clarity stabilizes. And lately, you've been choosing stability, even when it's less familiar. This is how timelines shift without chaos. You don't need to change your entire life at once. You simply stop agreeing to what misaligns you. Reactions matter more than circumstances now. Not because circumstances don't matter, but because your response determines whether energy stays stuck or moves forward. When you respond from awareness, situations resolve faster. When you respond from habit, loops repeat. You've likely noticed this already. Something that once would have escalated simply didn't. A potential conflict dissolved because you didn't engage. A distraction lost interest when you didn't feed it. This isn't avoidance. It's energetic economy. You're no longer spending energy proving, defending, or chasing. You're investing it in what feels internally consistent. And consistency compounds. Repeated conscious choices begin shaping your reality quietly. Not overnight, but unmistakably. Opportunities feel less forced. Conversations feel more efficient. People either meet you at your clarity or fade naturally. No drama required. This phase often feels strangely uneventful from the outside. But internally, it's decisive. You're choosing honesty over comfort, clarity over familiarity, presence over performance. And with each choice, your system relaxes a little more. That relaxation isn't laziness. It's trust forming. Trust in your timing. Trust in your perception. Trust that you don't need to rush to arrive. As your choices align, resistance decreases. Life begins to cooperate quietly. Not because everything becomes easy, but because fewer things feel heavy. This is how personal alignment prepares you for collective shifts. Before the world changes visibly, individuals stabilize internally. And many are doing this at once. Not loudly, not together, but in parallel. That's the shift most people won't notice until it's already reshaped everything. And you're standing inside it right now. The collective shift happening without announcements. Not all change arrives with headlines. Some of the most powerful shifts happen quietly, without permission, without ceremony. This is one of them. What you're experiencing isn't isolated. It's individual, but not alone. Across different places, different lives, people like you are recalibrating at the same time. Not through shared beliefs, through shared awareness. This is how collective shifts begin. Not with movements, with moments. Moments where people stop reacting automatically. Moments where attention is reclaimed. Moments where values rearrange without debate. You may have noticed subtle changes in the world around you. Not in systems, but in priorities. People questioning what once felt obvious. Less tolerance for noise. More interest in meaning, creativity, and sustainability, not as trends, but as necessities. This isn't coincidence. When enough individuals stop feeding outdated patterns, those patterns weaken collectively. Not because they're challenged, but because they're ignored. Power doesn't disappear. It shifts where attention goes. And attention is moving inward. This phase doesn't reward control. It rewards coherence. Structures built on urgency, pressure, and constant engagement begin to feel unstable. Not because they collapse immediately, but because fewer people resonate with them. You may feel this as a quiet refusal inside yourself. A lack of interest in certain narratives. A disconnection from drama that once felt unavoidable. This is influence without intention. By choosing calm, you contribute to stability. By choosing integrity, you reduce distortion. By choosing presence, you create clarity in shared spaces. Collective change doesn't require agreement. It requires enough individuals to stop reinforcing what no longer works. And that's happening now. Silence plays a role here. Not silence as suppression. Silence as space. Space where reactive cycles can't sustain themselves. Space where new approaches can emerge naturally. You may feel less compelled to explain your choices during this phase. Less interested in convincing anyone of anything. That restraint isn't withdrawal. It's wisdom. Because during realignment, force creates friction. Resonance creates momentum. This is why the shift feels slow to those watching externally, and fast to those experiencing it internally. From the outside, little appears to change. From within, everything reorganizes. And people like you act as stabilizers during this process. Not by leading, not by instructing, simply by living in alignment. Your calm becomes contagious. Your boundaries create clarity. Your refusal to participate in chaos reduces its reach. This is the kind of influence that doesn't seek recognition. And because it doesn't seek recognition, it lasts. As collective patterns soften, something else happens. Awareness begins to transmit, not through words, but through presence. That's the next phase. Because once alignment stabilizes, it naturally affects others. Even when you're not trying to influence anyone at all. Living as a catalyst without trying to influence anyone. You may not have noticed it, but your presence has already started to ripple outward. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not through explanation or persuasion. Just through being. There's a subtle energy in living authentically. In meeting each moment without pretense, without performance, without the need to justify yourself. People sense it. Not consciously, but at a deeper level. They feel a calm consistency. A coherence that doesn't ask for attention. And it resonates. This is the essence of influence right now. It's not volume. It's resonance. You may notice someone adjusting around you, not because you told them to, but because your clarity created a silent permission for them to do the same. Another person may act differently simply because your example revealed a path they hadn't realized was possible. Even strangers are affected. The way energy moves doesn't need language. Your role isn't to fix. It's not to convince. It's to anchor alignment in your own system and let it naturally radiate outward. Every small choice now carries disproportionate weight. The calm refusal to engage in chaos becomes magnetic. The decision to honor your inner timing becomes a template for others to honor theirs. Integrity attracts integrity, without asking, without effort. You may feel a strange paradox. Your life is quieter, yet it touches more than it ever has. Your decisions seem smaller, yet they shift far more than you can measure. This is the subtlety of being a catalyst. The work happens beneath the surface. Not because you hide it, but because authenticity is invisible until it resonates. And the most remarkable part is that influence grows strongest when it's unintended. When you stop trying to guide outcomes. When you stop measuring reactions. When you stop seeking validation. Others adjust, expand, or awaken without your interference. And all you've done is remain grounded in your own truth. This is the secret power of alignment, the quiet magnetism of clarity, the ripple effect of intentional presence. You may notice that influence feels effortless now. Not manipulative, not persuasive, just natural. And that natural influence becomes cumulative. Every small choice, every moment of awareness, every instance of quiet integrity. It compounds over time. Eventually, the world responds, not with chaos, not with announcement, but with subtle shifts, smoother interactions, and new possibilities appearing quietly around you. This is where your awakening meets its practical reality, where personal alignment becomes collective impact, where subtle awareness transforms not just your life, but the spaces you inhabit. And as this influence unfolds naturally, another layer emerges, anchoring the shift through daily awareness. By now, you've noticed that change isn't a single moment. It's a series of small, deliberate alignments, stitched together by awareness. The question now is, how do you anchor this shift? It begins with observation, not analysis, not overthinking, simply noticing patterns, coincidences, repeated nudges, the quiet whispers the universe sends your way. You may see the same number, hear the same phrase, or bump into the same message multiple times. It's not random. It's guidance. It's the moon, the stars, and your own intuition converging to confirm that your choices are on track. Reflection is key. Set aside moments each day to step back, breathe, and acknowledge what's unfolding inside and around you. Not to force clarity, but to recognize it. Even small acknowledgments, a journal entry, a quiet walk, a conscious breath, anchor insight into reality. Intentional action matters too. Each small step you take in alignment strengthens the momentum of your internal shift. Choosing honesty in a conversation. Pausing before reacting. Allowing your body to rest when it signals fatigue. These microactions accumulate, shaping not just your inner world, but the external environment. Pay attention to subtle signals. Repeated thoughts, slight urges, moments of stillness. These are markers that you're on the right track. They guide decisions that seem insignificant at first but carry profound consequences over time. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. You don't need dramatic rituals. You need quiet, ongoing presence. And as the days pass after January 20th, notice how the energy around you responds. The world may not change immediately. People may not notice. But systems, relationships, and opportunities begin to realign with your frequency, naturally and without force. This is how you maintain momentum. Not through struggle. Not through control. Through calm observation, deliberate choice, and grounded action. Anchoring the shift is less about doing and more about being. Being aware. Being present. Being aligned. And as long as you honor this phase, the subtle recalibrations you've been experiencing will continue shaping your future. Your energy, your clarity, and your quiet presence will ripple through time, long after January 20th has passed. The shift is already in motion. And now, it's yours to sustain. You've reached this moment because your awareness is ready. Because you notice what most people overlook. Because the quiet signs, the repeated thoughts, sudden emotions, physical nudges, and subtle choices are speaking directly to you. This isn't coincidence. It's timing. It's your system aligning with the lunar and cosmic currents, guiding you to a place where clarity outweighs distraction, presence outweighs reaction, and inner authority outweighs external chaos. Remember, the shift isn't over after January 20th. It continues quietly, invisibly, in every pause you take, every conscious decision you make, and every subtle act of integrity you choose. Your life, your energy, and your reality respond to these small but profound moments. And each one compounds into a ripple that reaches far beyond what you can see. Now it's time to step fully into this phase. Honor your subtle signals. Trust your intuition. Choose coherence over habit. And let the world adjust to your resonance rather than the other way around. If this message reached you, it wasn't by chance. You were meant to hear it. You were meant to remember. You are part of a shift far greater than yourself, and your awareness is a catalyst, quietly, profoundly, and irresistibly. If you felt this resonate, take a moment to pause, reflect, and act. Journal your repeated thoughts and subtle nudges. Notice where your energy naturally flows. Commit to one small choice today that aligns with your clarity. And if you're ready for more guidance on your awakening, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned. The universe has more whispers waiting for those who are awake enough to listen, and now you're listening.